A cop humiliated a black teen in court, but he was shocked when he realized the teen's father was the judge overseeing the case. A cop broke a black teen's jaw in court, thinking no one could stop him. He didn't realize the teen's father was the presiding judge watching every move. Subscribe if you believe arrogance always collapses when true authority rises. The first crack came when the courtroom door slammed shut behind him. Marcus Eland didn't flinch. He stepped into the back of Marbleton County Courthouse Room B with quiet purpose, though the thud echoed like a warning. The low murmurs from the gallery faltered briefly as heads turned, then quickly turned back, lulled by the rhythmic shuffle of papers and rustle of robes. Marcus moved toward the second row, his shoes soundless against the polished oak floor. He kept his gaze forward, but his peripheral vision noted everything. 3 deputies stationed at the perimeter, a tense cluster of attorneys near the plaintiff's table, and the slow, deliberate movements of Officer Darren Hale, whose eyes followed Marcus like a hawk circling its prey. Marcus sat down, his notebook clutched tightly in his lap. He didn't look at Hale, though he felt the weight of the man's stare like a physical shove between his shoulders. The courtroom lights buzzed faintly above, catching the gold trim of the state seal behind the bench. Judge Leonard Eland, his father, sat poised above them all, robes impeccable, expression unreadable. To the rest of the room, he was simply the presiding authority. To Marcus, he was both shield and symbol. He kept his posture straight, shoulders squared, breathing slow. But his thoughts ticked like gears. Stay unnoticed. Don't provoke. Watch everything. Across the room, Officer Hale shifted his stance, one hand dropping lazily to rest on his utility belt. His jaw tightened, the muscles pulsing along the side of his face. To anyone else, it was a neutral pose. But Marcus wasn't anyone else. He recognized the micro-expressions, the held breath, the too casual placement of feet, the glance that lingered a moment too long. He had seen that look before, in gym locker rooms, school hallways, the slow-building tension of someone who decided you were a problem long before you even spoke. Last month, Marcus had corrected Hale's son during a school presentation. Nothing aggressive, just a clarification about case law the younger Hale had misunderstood. Apparently, word traveled fast. Faster than truth. Judge Eland raised his gavel and brought it down with a sharp crack, silencing the last whispers. We are here today to begin preliminary proceedings in the matter of Elridge versus Norrell. Let the record show both parties are present. The legal cadence rolled on, but Marcus's ears filtered it out. His attention narrowed. Hale was moving slowly now, taking small, deliberate steps along the back row. His boots scraped lightly against the tile beneath the rug, creating a rhythm Marcus instinctively timed. 6 paces. Pause. A muttered word. Turn. He wasn't just patrolling, he was circling. Marcus didn't dare move his head, but his eyes flicked to the side. One of the other deputies, older, calm-eyed, cast a warning glance at Hale, but the man ignored it. The court's energy shifted slightly. The plaintiff's lawyer adjusted his tie too many times. A clerk dropped a folder. Even Judge Eland's brow creased as he scanned the room. Something's off, Marcus thought. The temperature's rising. He scribbled a note in the margin of his notebook. Boot scrape. Circling. Ignored peer. Rising voice. Every sign pointed to a volatile shift in control. Hale walked past again. This time, his shoulder brushed the corner of Marcus's bench. No apology. No glance. Just a message. Marcus tightened his grip on the pen. This wasn't fear. It was calculation. He reminded himself of his father's lessons. Observe patterns, not noise. Posture over volume. Distance over confrontation. He adjusted his blazer slightly, revealing the edge of a small, discreet recorder clipped inside the inner pocket. A precaution Leonard had insisted on, just in case court observations ever turned educationally unpredictable. A chair scraped nearby. One of Marcus's classmates had just entered, giving him a small nod before finding a seat in the back. The air was growing dense, like a theater seconds before the curtain rose. Every sound seemed too loud, too crisp. Every movement too intentional. Hale stopped again, this time directly behind him. Marcus could smell the man's aftershave, sharp, synthetic, over-applied. "You're out a lot for someone just watching," Hale muttered under his breath, words low and close to Marcus's ear. Marcus didn't turn. "Observation sharpens clarity," he replied, voice neutral. Hale snorted softly, stepping away. But Marcus caught the flash of irritation in his reflection on the gallery rail. Across the room, Judge Eland's eyes met his son's for the briefest of moments. They didn't nod. They didn't smile. But the glance held an entire strategy. Don't move unless you have to. Don't show them what you know. Let the facts fall into place. We've trained for this. Marcus exhaled slowly and looked back down at his notes. Sometimes the smallest courtroom detail can explode into life-altering consequences. Move. The word hissed just above Marcus's shoulder, low and sharp enough to sound like a threat. He didn't flinch, only shifted subtly in his seat to glance sideways without turning his head. Deputy Darren Hale stood directly behind him, arms crossed, jaw locked, boots planted in a posture that signaled ownership of the space around him. The courtroom air thickened with invisible friction. Marcus didn't speak. He simply straightened his spine, slowly lifted his notebook back onto his lap, and resumed writing. A single bead of sweat slid down the side of his neck, not from fear but from pressure from being watched so intently that it felt like heat. He knew that sound, the deliberate boot scrape against the floor. It was the kind of move meant to intimidate without breaking rules. Yet Marcus had been trained to spot things like this. His father had made sure of that. Judge Leonard Eland sat high above, gavel in hand, his voice echoing with quiet control as he addressed the court. "Let's maintain order, gentlemen. We'll begin with the plaintiff's remarks." Marcus's pen moved steadily, but his mind was mapping every movement in the room. Hale's pacing had become erratic, 3 steps to the left, a pause, 2 back, and then that unnerving stillness behind him again. It wasn't normal patrol. Hale was watching him, and only him. "I don't like the way you look around," Hale muttered again, just loud enough for Marcus to hear, his breath touching the boy's ear. "Eyes like that think they own the place." Marcus closed his notebook softly. He didn't rise to the bait. His jaw remained set, but his breathing deepened, measured and deliberate. He had already noted the dropped pen near Hale's foot, the quiet warning from one of the younger officers seated along the gallery, and the tension clenching Hale's right hand. Hale wanted a reason. He wanted Marcus to twitch, to speak back, to give him just 1 inch of justification. "Everything okay, deputy?" asked another male bailiff nearby, casually observing. Hale smiled with tight lips. "All good. Just keeping an eye on things." Marcus didn't believe it for a second. The plaintiff's voice droned on, arguing over easement rights, but the background dispute barely registered to Marcus. His real focus remained. Endure. Wait. Don't make the first move. But then Hale deliberately shifted forward, one boot thudding against Marcus's bench leg. The contact was slight, but it was not an accident. Marcus's eyes flicked up, locking momentarily with his father's gaze. Judge Eland hadn't missed it. The briefest narrowing of the judge's eyes told Marcus what he needed to know. He saw it. That was enough. Marcus slowly leaned back, putting his hands on either side of the notebook. It wasn't submission, it was repositioning. A better stance. He began calculating silently. Distances to exits, witness proximity, sight lines. Hale's posture was deteriorating from official to confrontational. The danger wasn't hypothetical anymore. Behind the tension, dramatic irony thickened like fog. Hale thought Marcus was just a kid, observant perhaps, but unthreatening. He had no idea he was standing inches away from the one person in this courtroom who'd been trained specifically to watch for people like him. Marcus didn't just study books. He studied behavior, risk, and restraint. And he was just waiting. Another step, another glare. Hale's fingers hovered near his utility belt, not yet threatening, but close enough to make the moment volatile. Marcus felt his throat tighten, not from fear, but from restraint. He would not react. Not yet. He remembered what his father had said once while they practiced situational drills at home. The loudest move doesn't win. It's the one they don't see coming that matters. So Marcus waited, even as every instinct screamed that the moment was nearing a snap. The courtroom's wooden floor creaked. Somewhere near the jury box, a lawyer shuffled papers. A cough echoed from the gallery. But none of it mattered. The only sound Marcus truly heard was Hale's breath growing shallow and fast behind him. Foreshadowing danced around them. The pen, the warning, the boots scraping the bench. The storm was forming. Marcus's mind locked onto a single thought. Don't be the one to light the fire. Just be ready when it burns. And as Hale's shadow loomed again, Marcus tensed, not to fight, but to endure just long enough. Even the quietest observer can change the tide of a storm. The blow came fast, too fast for most to process, but not for Marcus. Hale's hand shot out and slammed Marcus's shoulder against the side of the wooden bench with a force that cracked through the courtroom like a gunshot muffled beneath layers of protocol. The teen's body twisted involuntarily, his face striking the polished edge of the bench with a sickening crack. A sharp, brutal noise. His jaw absorbed the full brunt of the impact. Marcus's vision flashed white with pain. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. But his eyes widened, teeth clenching as blood pooled along the inside of his mouth. One corner of his lips split open, the taste of iron washing in as if to confirm what he already knew. His jaw was broken. Gasps erupted behind him. Wooden seats scraped as people stood. The room, previously focused on a loud property dispute between two businessmen, shifted in an instant. All eyes landed on the sudden explosion of violence. Officer Darren Hale stood rigid, still hovering over Marcus like a victorious predator. His hand now twitched at his belt, knuckles pale, jaw clenched. His expression wasn't a surprise or regret. It was satisfaction. Controlled satisfaction. As if this had been building up for far too long. I told you to sit straight and stop fidgeting. Hale barked, loud enough for the room to hear, but his voice cracked with something unsteady. Maybe now you'll show some respect. Marcus didn't answer. His breath was shallow, measured. Pain laced each inhale, but his mind moved faster than the throbbing waves pulsing through his face. Stay calm. He steadied himself with his hand against the bench and slowly eased back into an upright position, though every movement screamed with discomfort. One side of his jaw sagged unnaturally. He didn't dare touch it. He kept his eyes low, but not submissive, observant, calculating. A few feet behind them, Judge Leonard Eland had risen half an inch from his bench. His gavel rested in his right hand like a sleeping blade, unraised but ready. The courtroom air thickened. Every murmur, every breath seemed to freeze in anticipation. No one had seen it coming. No one except Marcus. The earlier signs had all been there. The subtle shift in Hale's posture when Marcus entered. The slow circling behind his bench. The low muttered accusations about disrespect. Even the dropped pen, deliberately nudged by Hale's boot, had been a provocation. Marcus had ignored them all, hoping that dignity would diffuse tension. But now violence had spoken first. From the gallery, Marcus's friend Jalen stood up. Hey, what's your problem, man? You just hit him. His voice cracked with disbelief. Sit down. Another deputy barked, moving to intervene, but Jalen had already pulled out his phone. So had others. Don't move, anyone. Hale snapped, voice rising with adrenaline. Security protocol. He was resisting. Marcus whispered, voice thick and slurred from his injury. He let the word hang, blood dripping slowly from the edge of his mouth onto the courtroom floor. Leonard's knuckles turned white on the gavel. Still seated, he spoke with the control of a coiled spring. Deputy Hale, remain where you are. Do not escalate this any further. But Hale ignored him. You think I don't see what this is? Hale hissed under his breath, leaning closer to Marcus, his face tight with resentment. You walk in here like you own the place. Like your name gets you special treatment. Not today. Marcus blinked slowly. Despite the pain, his mind remained clear. This wasn't about a notebook. This wasn't about court rules. This was personal. He could hear murmurs spreading through the crowd like a ripple across water. Footsteps shuffled. Phones were raised. A junior clerk at the corner of the room stepped toward the emergency security switch, but stopped, uncertain. Leonard's voice cut again, louder this time. Deputy Hale, step away from the boy. Now. Marcus's hand moved subtly to his pocket, fingers brushing against a small rectangular recorder. It had been running the moment Hale began pacing earlier. Every word, every mutter, every aggressive breath. His father had once told him, when you know someone intends harm, you don't shout, you document. Now, the documentation had blood to go with it. Hale hadn't backed up. He dropped something. I reached for it. He pulled away. I had to act. No one believes that, Marcus said quietly, almost too softly to hear. His voice was strained, every syllable dipped in pain, but coated with clarity. There are cameras, witnesses, and a cracked jaw. You've already acted too much. For a moment, silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Then the doors of the courtroom creaked open. A senior deputy, Sergeant Miles, stepped inside, eyes sweeping across the scene. His hand hovered over his radio. From the look on his face, it was clear someone had already called for review. Protocol had been breached. Spectacle had become scandal. Leonard finally rose to his feet, his height casting a long shadow from the raised bench. Everyone remained seated. Sergeant Miles, secure the deputy until this incident is formally assessed. Miles hesitated only a second before nodding. But Hale stepped back, hands raised, eyes darting, calculating his next move. It was too late for calculation. Too many eyes. Too many phones. Too much proof. Marcus didn't move again. He couldn't. But in that moment, despite the pain, he had never felt more steady. The moment had happened, and everything that followed would be built from it. One careless act can ignite consequences beyond comprehension. The blow landed hard, sharp and direct. Marcus's head snapped to the side, the right edge of his jaw catching the full force of Officer Hale's open palm and the shove that followed. A sickening crunch echoed in his ears. His back struck the wooden bench behind him, jarring his spine, and a thin stream of blood slipped from the corner of his mouth, warm and metallic. He didn't cry out, not even a gasp. Instead, Marcus blinked once, twice, forcing his vision to stabilize. His teeth clenched against the pain, and his fingers instinctively curled over the edge of his blazer pocket. He knew what had just happened. But more importantly, he knew what had to happen next. Hale stood above him, breathing hard, the veins in his neck pulsing. "Maybe now you'll learn to keep your head down," he growled, loud enough for only a few nearby attendees to hear. Marcus didn't move. His thoughts sharpened instantly into a familiar pattern, an inner calm his father had trained him to enter during moments of confrontation. Breathe low. Don't react with heat. React with clarity. He reached slowly into the inside pocket of his jacket, pretending to retrieve a tissue, but instead pressed his thumb gently against the edge of a hidden recorder clipped inside. A soft click confirmed it was active. He hadn't expected to use it today, not like this, but it was now the most important item in the room. Hale, unaware of the recording, leaned closer. "You think your little stares mean something? You sit there like you're above the rules." "Not today." Marcus met his eyes. His jaw throbbed, but he forced his voice to stay steady. "I didn't say anything," he said quietly, blood tinting his lower lip. "Exactly," Hale snapped, jabbing a finger at his chest. "You kids think silence makes you innocent, makes you clever, but I see through it." Other officers in the courtroom shifted uneasily. A few exchanged glances. One young deputy, Officer Kendrick, barely out of training, eyed Hale's stance with uncertainty. He'd seen the blow. So had half the courtroom, though most were too stunned to react. Whispers began to stir in the rows behind them. Still seated, Marcus reached for the notebook Hale had knocked from his lap. He gripped it tightly, not just to anchor his shaking hand, but to draw Hale's attention back toward him. The more the officer spoke, the more he'd document himself. From a bench, Judge Leonard Elin watched. He had not spoken. He had not moved, but his eyes, steady and cold, were fixed entirely on Hale. A subtle narrowing of his brow suggested calculations were already underway, legal procedures forming in silence, sharpened by years of experience. He hadn't needed to rise to recognize what had just happened. He'd felt it, seen it, but he would wait. Because Marcus was no ordinary victim, and this wasn't yet the time to intervene. "I'm still bleeding," Marcus murmured, voice even but deliberate. So, Hades spot should have stayed out of the way. In a surrounding silence, that word hung like a blade. Should have. A threat disguised as instruction. Marcus felt the heat in his chest rise, but he clamped down on it. He thought of the drills his father had taught him, how to mentally slow the moment, how to breathe through impact, how to shift the power of a room without raising a single fist. He pressed a second button on the recorder, one that began silently uploading its contents to a secure cloud drive. 2 backups were already in place. If anything happened to him, the footage would be accessible to his father and to a trusted contact Marcus had pre-programmed weeks ago. "Sir," came a low voice behind Hale. It was Kendrick stepping forward. His voice held tension, hesitant but firm. "Maybe we should get medical." "I've got this," Hale barked, shooting the younger deputy a glare that made him freeze mid-step. Then, turning back to Marcus, he sneered, "You're not getting special treatment just because you showed up in a blazer." Marcus looked down. Blood had stained the collar of his white shirt. There was no use responding. Not yet. Instead, he angled his head just enough for the courtroom cameras to catch his face. He made sure the blood was visible, made sure the subtle outline of Hale's handprint could still be seen forming red along his cheek. His plan, forged in instinct and refined through every patient moment of training, was unfolding. From the bench, Judge Leonard's gavel hand tensed slightly, but remained still. He needed the chain of evidence, the full extent of Hale's recklessness. Marcus had already begun constructing it. In Marcus's mind, each second was now part of the setup, every breath a line in a transcript that would later serve as a weapon in court. He wasn't just enduring the pain. He was documenting it, broadcasting it, turning every insult into proof. "Look at me when I talk to you," Hale growled again, reaching forward as if to grab Marcus by the collar. And that was the mistake. Marcus flinched back, not wildly, but enough to draw attention. Several spectators gasped. Officer Kendrick stepped forward a second time, more decisively. "Sir," Kendrick said louder, "you need to stand down. Judge Eland's watching." The name struck Hale like ice. His hand froze midair. He turned slowly, just as Judge Leonard Eland rose from his seat behind the elevated desk. The sound of the chair legs scraping across the wood was subtle but unmistakable. He didn't strike the gavel. Not yet. His voice alone was enough to command every ear in the room. "Officer Hale," the judge said, voice low but resonant, "take one step further, and you will be removed from this courtroom immediately." Hale turned pale. He looked from a judge to Marcus, back again. Recognition, delayed and full of dread, finally dawned. "That's his father?" someone whispered near the back. Marcus's hand remained over the recorder, the blood still visible, the tension in the air wound tight as wire. The setup was complete. Sometimes the quietest witness holds the loudest power. His knees buckled slightly as the force of Officer Darren Hale's shove rattled through his body, but he caught himself against the polished bench, jaw clenched hard, both in pain and in strategy. Blood welled along his lower lip and dripped silently onto the courtroom floor. A ripple of gasps surged through the crowd, followed by stunned silence. But Hale wasn't done. "You think you can stare me down, punk?" Hale barked, his voice sharp and arrogant, reverberating through the courtroom like a whip crack. His uniform shifted as he squared his shoulders, chest puffed in a shallow display of dominance. He didn't notice the cell phones discreetly raised by 2 teenage boys seated near the back. Nor did he register the subtle movement of a third boy pressing a button on the side of his watch. Marcus didn't speak. His eyes locked onto Hale's, unflinching, measured, and cold. He didn't need to say anything. His silence spoke volumes. His thoughts were crystal clear. "You've already lost. You just don't know it yet." From the elevated bench, Judge Leonard Eland rose an inch. Not much, but enough to shift the courtroom's gravitational center. His gavel remained untouched, fingertips hovering just above the handle, poised. His voice came low, calm, and searing with restrained fury. "Officer Hale," he said, drawing the eyes of every lawyer, spectator, and official in the room. "Step away from that young man. Now." Hale glanced over, scoffing with a smirk that betrayed his ignorance. He disrespected me. I won't be undermined by some smug teenager. That teenager, Leonard interrupted, his voice cutting sharper than steel, is my son. A full second passed. Then two. The words hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Faces turned. Cameras refocused. Phones that had been recording out of curiosity now found deeper purpose. Hale's smirk faltered. Marcus didn't move. He knew the next moment was critical. He shifted slightly in his seat, blood still wet on his lip, and with a slow, deliberate motion, pressed the underside of his chair, activating the signal he and his father had arranged. A silent alert. One designed for exactly this situation. From the far side of the room, Deputy Mason Corrin, a senior integrity officer assigned to monitor courtroom conduct, stood abruptly. His jaw was set, his steps swift and purposeful as he moved down the aisle toward Hale. Deputy Hale, Corrin said, voice firm, you are hereby relieved of duty pending immediate review. Step back and surrender your badge. What? Hale laughed nervously, glancing around as if someone would object, come to his defense. No one moved. No one spoke. Now, Corrin repeated. Hale took a step back, not out of respect, but because the realization had finally begun to settle in, he had grossly miscalculated. His authority was evaporating. Leonard Eland's gavel slammed down with an echoing crack, silencing the room like a pistol shot. Court is now in recess, pending investigation into an incident of courtroom misconduct by a serving officer. All parties will remain in place. Witnesses who recorded the altercation are instructed to preserve all footage. Any tampering will be treated as obstruction. Marcus exhaled slowly, jaw tight from pain, but posture unshaken. He didn't gloat. He didn't speak. He simply stared forward, the blood on his collar a quiet testament to the violence he had endured and the storm he had just weathered. Hale opened his mouth to argue, but Corrin had already closed the distance, unclipping the officer's badge with a firm, practiced motion and escorting him toward the side exit. Marcus reached into his blazer, retrieved the small voice recorder from his pocket, and set it gently on the bench. Hale's earlier insults, the threats, and the physical assault, it was all there. The spectators were no longer murmuring. They were stunned into full silence. The balance of power had shifted so abruptly, so completely, it felt surreal. One boy, one act of preparation, one irreversible mistake by an arrogant officer. Leonard didn't look at his son as the bailiffs began ushering people into position. His face remained neutral, judicial, carved in stone. But beneath that, there was something unmistakable, a current of pride, tightly contained. Hale, escorted and now pale-faced, glanced once more at Marcus. He searched for something, weakness, fear, regret. But all he saw was calm. Strategic, deliberate calm. The moment had belonged to Hale for seconds. Marcus had taken it back with precision. Not through violence, but through foresight, restraint, and the quiet authority born of knowing exactly when to act. And as the heavy courtroom doors creaked shut behind the disgraced officer, the echo of Leonard's gavel still hung in the air like judgment itself. A single misjudgment can unravel a lifetime of assumed power. Hale's arms jerked instinctively as the senior deputy clamped down, wrenching him back with practiced precision. The officer's pale face flushed with resistance, eyes burning with disbelief as if the very idea of being restrained in his own courtroom offended him more than the act itself. His jaw clenched, body twitching with outrage. "Let me go," he growled, voice low and cracking under pressure. "I was doing my job," but no one moved to support him. Marcus didn't stand. He sat motionless on the wooden bench, his back straight despite the tremor of pain shooting through his jaw. A small trail of blood curved from the corner of his mouth, slowly darkening his crisp white collar. He dabbed it away with the edge of his sleeve, wincing, then calmly folded his hands on his lap, as if refusing to give Hale even the satisfaction of visible discomfort. The courtroom had shifted. Where once there was idle chatter and legal monotony, now there was breathless silence. Even the hum of the ceiling fan seemed to hesitate. All eyes were locked on the boy and the officer. Judge Leonard Eland didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Deputy Hale, he said, his voice sharp as a chisel. Explain your actions. Now, Hale jerked against the grip of the senior deputy, his bravado fraying at the edges. The boy was being disrespectful. I told him to quiet down, and you assaulted him. Leonard's voice interrupted with precision, cutting through Hale's defense like a scalpel. In my courtroom, without provocation, on camera, the deputy's face twitched. His mouth opened, then closed, searching for an angle, a lifeline, but there was none. Marcus sat quietly, eyes forward, watching not just Hale but the room. His objective had expanded with the blow to his jaw. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about making sure Hale answered for everything, now, not later. Quietly, he reached into his blazer pocket and pressed the small button on a concealed device, his personal recorder. The blinking red light was hidden under the lapel. Everything from the shove to Hale's rage was now preserved in high-definition audio. The dramatic irony thickened with every second. Hale had assumed this was just a kid, an easy mark. But Marcus had trained for moments like this, learning from his father how subtle positioning, tone, and observation could shape an entire outcome. Leonard stood slowly. The air seemed to condense around him. You didn't know who he was, the judge said flatly, locking eyes with Hale. Did you? Hale's confusion deepened. What? Leonard pointed, once calmly, at Marcus. That's my son. The silence cracked like a gunshot. A ripple of gasps spread through the courtroom. A few attorneys leaned back in their seats, as if physically struck by the revelation. The other deputies exchanged glances, stiffened, then focused their posture toward the restrained Hale. I didn't know, Hale stammered, but the strength in his voice had drained. It doesn't matter who he is. It does matter, Leonard replied coldly. Because your mistake wasn't just in using force. It was in underestimating someone simply because they were young. Because you assumed your badge gave you power over preparation. In the back of the room, Marcus's classmates, 3 boys who'd slipped in quietly, each held their phones slightly angled, still recording. At Marcus's subtle nod, one of them tapped his screen, saving the file and forwarding it to a shared folder titled Courtroom Archive, Hale Incident. Hale's eyes darted to the phones. For the first time, real fear crept in behind his rage. You're all filming? He barked, the strain cracking in his voice. They are, Marcus said softly, looking up for the first time. His tone was calm, even, but beneath the words was something else, precision, intent, control. And so is the courtroom system. And my jacket. You've been recorded 6 different ways. I'd stop speaking if I were you. The senior deputy holding Hale nodded grimly. You might want to listen, Darren. The judge's gavel struck once, hard, echoing through the space like thunder. That's enough. Leonard's voice resonated with finality. Deputy Hale is to be escorted to the antechamber for formal review. This court is now in recess pending investigation. All footage and testimony are to be preserved. Anyone who interferes will be held in contempt. As the deputies began to lead Hale toward the rear doors, Marcus caught his father's gaze. Leonard gave a small, silent nod. Approval. Yes, but more than that. An acknowledgement that Marcus had executed every lesson perfectly. Not with violence, not with panic, but with calm, recorded precision. Hale twisted one last time, eyes darting between the judge and the boy, trying to summon words, but none came. And as the courtroom doors swung shut behind him, sealing him off from the institution he once thought he controlled, every earlier cue snapped into sharp focus. The pen dropped to Hale's foot, Marcus testing his proximity. The boot scrape, Hale's twitchy anxiety. The whispered warnings, Marcus's allies recognizing threat. The pocket recorder triggered at the right second. The classmates prepositioned for coverage. The judge waiting for the strike before revealing the connection. Foreshadowing had bloomed into proof. And every misstep Hale made was now frozen in digital memory, impossible to deny. Power often falters when it underestimates precision and preparation. The metal door slammed behind Officer Darren Hale as 2 deputies escorted him out of the courtroom, his arms gripped tightly behind his back. The echo of that door reverberated like the crack of a starter pistol, signaling the beginning of a different kind of trial, one no longer about property disputes or legal paperwork, but about perception, power, and the price of arrogance. Marcus Eland sat silently on the bench, pain radiating from the fracture in his jaw. The copper taste of blood lingered in his mouth, but he didn't reach for a tissue or groan. Instead, he closed his eyes for half a breath, filtering the pain into clarity. Leonard Eland, still robed in judicial black, had called a recess moments earlier, not out of panic, but precision. Every decision, every word now mattered, and Marcus knew it. He straightened in his seat. Two classmates, Jasper Trent and Alum Rourke, were seated 2 rows behind. Marcus caught their eyes and gave a slow, deliberate nod. They understood instantly. Both boys pulled out their phones, ensuring the video files from different angles had saved properly. One had captured the moment Hale shoved Marcus against the bench. Another had caught the sneer that followed. A third had recorded the crowd's shocked gasps and Leonard's hand as it rose, not in panic, but in declaration. "Check the timestamps," Marcus whispered, low and firm, as Jasper leaned closer. Jasper gave a curt nod and began tagging clips with precise notes. The courtroom was still buzzing. Quiet murmurs, hushed disbelief, the shuffling of papers by anxious clerks trying to look busy. Deputy Wallace, one of the more seasoned officers, approached Judge Eland at the bench. "Sir, there may be some concern among the officers regarding protocol." Leonard cut him off gently, yet firmly. "There will be no room for concern where law has already been violated." His voice was a low thunder, steady, reverberating with calm authority. "Make sure the cameras remain rolling. Every moment hereafter is part of the record." Wallace froze for half a second before nodding. He turned and strode briskly toward the hallway. Marcus watched the exchange, then reached slowly into his coat pocket. His fingers found a small voice recorder, still running, still capturing. He pressed the lock feature to protect the file, then passed it discreetly to Alum, who tucked it inside his notebook. Everything needed redundancy. Marcus's mind, trained under the careful eye of his father, never relied on a single point of failure. The bench fell harder now. The lights above seemed brighter, but the space between each breath grew calmer. Across the room, 3 officers, Hale's known allies, whispered furiously among themselves. One of them, Deputy Krellin, threw a glance toward Marcus that lingered just a second too long. Marcus noticed, and so did Leonard. "Deputy Krellin," Leonard called, not raising his voice. "You may join Deputy Wallace in the hallway. Any attempt to influence witnesses or alter reports will be considered obstruction." Krellin's eyes widened slightly. He didn't speak. He merely walked out, footsteps slower than necessary, posture rigid with concealed resentment. Marcus's objective was shifting again. This wasn't about defending himself anymore. It was about securing the battlefield. Hale would try to flip the narrative once he reached the back offices or gave statements to internal affairs. He'd claim provocation, misinterpretation, or that the teen had been disruptive. But Marcus had already moved past surviving the moment. He was now playing in the realm of control, of the narrative, the evidence, and the legal framing. He leaned forward and whispered to Jasper again. "Make sure the raw clips get backed up to 3 separate drives. No editing. Time logs intact. What about statements?" Jasper asked, eyes serious. "I'll give mine once everything's set. Make sure everyone stays calm. Let them talk about what they saw in their own words, but timestamp the key points for cross-checking." His jaw ached with every syllable, but his voice remained unwavering. Leonard remained behind the bench, watching his son closely. He saw the wheels turning behind Marcus's focused eyes. Pride stirred, but he kept it buried beneath the solemnity of his role. Instead, he gave a subtle nod, barely perceptible to most, but unmistakable to Marcus. It meant, "We're doing exactly what you need to. Keep going." Meanwhile, murmurs grew among the gallery, court staff, law students, even the bailiff's assistant whispering theories about what they had just witnessed. Marcus was aware of all of it, but didn't let it distract him. His mind was assembling a chain of facts, a storyboard of events that would hold up under scrutiny. At the far side of the courtroom, an assistant to the County Legal Review Board arrived through the side entrance, holding a sealed folder. Leonard acknowledged him silently with a raised palm. It wasn't time for that yet. First, the truth had to be preserved accurately from all sides so that Hale's manipulation wouldn't be possible. Marcus took another breath. His jaw throbbed, but his mind sharpened further. The pain reminded him not of weakness, but of cost. He would speak later, not with emotion, not with outrage, but with surgical clarity. The officer who had seen him as prey would soon be exposed as a predator, and worse, a careless one. He sat straighter, eyes calm now, surrounded by allies who had seen everything unfold. Every decision, every strategic cue had meaning. The dropped pen, the whispered warning, the twitch in Hale's hand. Each detail had moved from warning sign to courtroom weapon. Across the room, the camera's red light blinked steadily. Justice favors those who anticipate every move before it is made. He acted confident, sure his brutality would go unchecked, unaware that every second had been anticipated and the father was about to enforce consequences from the bench. If you believe cruelty under uniform always folds when justice itself intervenes, hit subscribe now, because justice never hesitates. Cameras flashed the moment Marcus stepped out of the side door of the Marbleton County Courthouse, flanked by 2 deputies and a quiet entourage of court staff. The split along his lower lip had darkened into a sharp scab, and though his jaw throbbed beneath the pressure of a discreet compression brace, he didn't flinch. A swarm of reporters leaned over the courthouse steps, microphones outstretched like metal vipers, questions tumbling over one another. "Marcus, do you plan to press charges against Deputy Hale? Did your father influence the investigation? Was the attack racially motivated?" Marcus didn't answer. He paused just long enough to give a quiet, respectful nod to the crowd, then disappeared into the black sedan waiting at the curb. The doors closed. The cameras kept rolling. Inside the car, the silence was taut. Beside him sat Arlen Kess, one of the courthouse's internal press liaisons, a middle-aged clerk with graying hair and steady hands. He handed Marcus a folder. "These are the preliminary transcripts from the media inquiries. Your father said you'd want to review them before anything goes public." Marcus nodded and opened the folder, scanning through the notes. His fingers paused at a headline scribbled in red pen. "Teen's defiance sparks chaos in courtroom." He exhaled slowly. "That's not the story," he murmured. "No," Arlen agreed, "but it's the one they're eager to run with." By the next morning, every local news channel featured the incident. Aerial shots of the courthouse looped between segments. A shaky cell phone recording of the moment Hale grabbed Marcus played beneath voiceovers filled with speculation. Some anchors labeled the teen as brave. Others questioned his demeanor. Was he provoking the officer with silent defiance? One commentator asked with a smirk. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. He sat in his room, laptop open, watching the coverage with a quiet calm that masked the storm beneath. On his desk sat 3 devices, his phone, a tablet, and a recorder, each containing synchronized recordings from different angles. Every time Hale's hand shoved him, every second of the officer's tirade was preserved in high definition. And every time a media outlet twisted the narrative, Marcus took a note. His objective had shifted again: protect the truth before it was buried under noise. Leonard Eland, watching from the next room, understood without being told. He met with courthouse administrators that afternoon and issued a formal statement. No cameras in private corridors, no unapproved interviews inside the premises, and no leaks from staff. Any deviation would result in disciplinary action. Meanwhile, Marcus drafted a short statement with help from Arlen. It read, "I respect the legal process and trust that the facts will speak for themselves. I am cooperating fully with the investigation and request that the public allow space for truth to emerge without distortion." The phrasing was deliberate, neutral, controlled, precise. And it worked. Journalists quoted it word for word, unable to twist it without risking backlash. But not all media were willing to back off. A syndicated political blog ran a piece titled "Entitled Youth or Victim: The Thin Line Between Obedience and Outrage." The article claimed sources close to the courthouse said Marcus had been cold, uncooperative, and dismissive before the altercation. Marcus closed the tab and leaned back. "If they want receipts," he muttered, "I'll show them proof." He called two of his classmates, Ryan Dell and Caleb Voss, who had both recorded the incident from the spectator row. They agreed to upload the unedited footage, along with time-stamped statements, to a secure folder that Marcus shared with the investigation team. Later that evening, Marcus stood in the living room as Leonard reviewed the evidence files. The judge, though restrained in expression, paused longer than usual after watching the third angle, the clearest one, showing Hale gripping Marcus by the collar and slamming him back without provocation. Leonard didn't look at his son when he said, "This will hold in any courtroom. You've done everything by the book. I'm proud of you." Marcus swallowed hard, not from emotion, but because even speaking still ached. "There's one more thing," he said quietly. He pulled out a printed timeline he had assembled, minute-by-minute breakdowns of every event from the day of the incident, cross-referenced with recordings, witness statements, and prior disciplinary reports on Hale. It wasn't just about vindicating himself anymore. It was about exposing the pattern and preventing the next Hale from ever rising unchecked. Leonard took the pages without a word, but his fingers curled tightly around the edge. That night, Marcus drafted a second public statement, this time for select release. He kept it brief again. "My silence was not defiance. It was discipline. My actions were not emotional, they were strategic. I hope that any young person watching understands. Calm is not weakness, and truth doesn't need to shout." The media response shifted. Even outlets that had criticized him began to reconsider. Analysts highlighted Marcus's composure. Legal scholars commended his evidence gathering. A retired judge appeared on one broadcast and remarked, "That boy showed more restraint than most seasoned attorneys I've worked with." Still, there were whispers. Hale's allies within the department attempted their spin, calling Marcus's demeanor arrogant and suggesting the teenager's lineage gave him an unfair advantage. But Leonard anticipated the move. He scheduled a closed-door session with the county's ethics board, presenting the raw footage and internal documentation before anything could be weaponized in public. Marcus watched from behind the glass, unseen, as the board members reviewed every second. He saw their expressions change, skepticism melting into concern, then outrage. By the end of the session, the board chairman, a gray-suited man named Mr. Laren, removed his glasses and turned to Leonard. "This will require immediate procedural review." Marcus turned to leave before they saw him. He didn't need applause, just acknowledgement that the system would now face itself. Outside, reporters still lingered. Cameras still waited. But Marcus walked through them like fog, untouched, unbothered, already thinking 2 steps ahead. The game was no longer survival. It was structure, truth, and reform. Sometimes, the quietest presence commands the loudest truth. The courtroom fell into a brittle hush as Marcus Eland rose from his seat and made his way to the witness stand. The tension was immediate, electric. Every eye in the chamber locked onto the 16-year-old whose swollen jaw and composed demeanor had already stirred the town into hushed conversations and anxious headlines. The walls of the hearing room, lined with oak and centuries of legal tradition, now bore witness to a different kind of reckoning. A boy facing down the full weight of institutional arrogance. "State your name for the record," the tribunal chair said, voice steady but watchful. "Marcus Eland," he replied, voice clear despite the discomfort, each syllable deliberate. From the corner of the room, Officer Darren Hale sat with his arms crossed and his jaw clenched, eyes narrowing into cold slits. His legal counsel whispered something into his ear, but Hale barely nodded. He had expected this to be over by now. He hadn't expected the boy to speak with such clarity or to carry himself like someone who belonged in a room full of judges. "Walk us through what occurred that day," the prosecutor said. "Start from the moment you entered the courtroom." Marcus nodded once. "I arrived before the session began. My intention was to sit quietly and observe. I brought a notebook, this one. He held it up. The leather was scuffed from a fall. I was seated 3 rows from the front, against the aisle wall. He continued, walking the tribunal through each detail. How Hale began circling him, the lone mutters, the passive-aggressive stares. His voice didn't rise. He didn't embellish. He simply told the truth with surgical precision. Each line of testimony seemed to land like a pin dropping on a glass. The gallery remained silent, leaning in. Did Officer Hale say anything to you directly? He said, "Think you're better than everyone, don't you, kid?" He said it twice. The second time, he was closer. Hale's attorney stood. Objection. Subjective interpretation. That could have been a passing comment. Overruled, said the tribunal chair, not even glancing at him. The witness will continue. Marcus did. He described the moment when he accidentally brushed his notebook across the aisle floor. How Hale had seized on it. How the officer's boot pinned the notebook momentarily before Marcus reached down, then the shove, the hand on his jaw, the moment of fracture. Did you respond physically at any point? No. I kept my hands down. I looked at him and asked him to stop. Is that recorded? Yes, Marcus said, reaching into a folder placed neatly beside him. Multiple recordings, from my personal device and those of 3 other student witnesses. All were turned involuntarily. I've highlighted the timestamps for your convenience. As the files were passed to the tribunal panel, a thick pause settled. Hale shifted in his seat, lips tightening. One of the tribunal officers leaned into his screen, hit play, and the low-quality audio filled the chamber. Think you're better than everyone. Hey, you listening? Pick it up like a normal. Thud, stop resisting. There was no resistance in the video. No defiance. Only a clear view of Marcus being shoved, his head striking the wooden bench edge, and the unmistakable snap of startled gasps from the room. Hale, off to the side, stood in full view, his hand gripping the boy's chin with unnecessary force. Marcus waited. He watched Hale from the corner of his eye, not to provoke, but to understand the man's unraveling. He could see the officer's leg bouncing, his throat tightening with every second the footage played. What had once been a smirk of power was now the taut mask of someone realizing his bluff had been called in front of an entire legal institution. The prosecutor resumed. Did Officer Hale have any prior encounters with you before this incident? Yes. At a school security assembly, he was a guest speaker. He reprimanded me for asking about student rights during a Q&A. The disagreement was brief, but clearly remembered. Noted, said the chair. Objection again, Hale's lawyer barked. Irrelevant to the incident. The chair's gaze cut through him. Pattern of behavior is relevant. Denied. Dramatic irony pulsed through the room. Hale had assumed Marcus to be a silent teenager who'd retreat under pressure. But every answer, every citation, every documented reference revealed otherwise. Marcus had spent the past week preparing, building a timeline, cross-referencing policies, and compiling witness lists. He'd studied courtroom procedures under the quiet guidance of his father for years, not because he planned to be in one like this, but because he learned early that calm, informed presence was its own form of power. As Marcus neared the end of his testimony, he shifted slightly, resting his palm on the folder beside him. His jaw ached, but he spoke steadily. I'm not here to destroy anyone, he said, addressing the tribunal directly. But no one should walk into a courtroom, especially young people, and fear being harmed by someone whose job is to protect them. I didn't provoke anything. I recorded everything because I knew what it looked like when power starts to slip. A murmur ran through the spectators. The judge's gavel tapped gently once, and silence returned. The prosecutor turned. No further questions. Leonard Eland, seated on the side to maintain impartiality, allowed himself only a slow nod, barely perceptible. But Marcus saw it. It wasn't just approval. It was recognition. A signal that the groundwork laid in quiet moments, long before the courtroom clash, was now bearing fruit. Hale's defense scrambled to respond, but each question they asked only highlighted their lack of preparation. They fumbled timelines, misquoted transcripts, and attempted to frame Marcus as an overconfident teen. But it didn't work. The recordings showed restraint. The medical report confirmed the injury. The witnesses corroborated his version. The calm cadence in Marcus's delivery didn't waver once. And when the defense finally sat down, frustrated and cornered, the tribunal chair exhaled softly and looked over the paperwork. Marcus stepped down from the witness stand, his posture composed but resolute. The courtroom's eyes followed him not with pity, but with deepening respect. He had held his ground, not through retaliation or fury, but through relentless precision. As he returned to his seat, the echo of every earlier moment converged. The twitch in Hale's boot, the warnings from friends, the glares, the grip to the jaw, all of it now solidified in legal memory, undeniable and irreversible. And as Hale sat across the courtroom, silent and shrunken behind his defense table, it became painfully clear that his control had eroded the moment he underestimated the boy who simply watched, waited, and acted with truth. Preparation and patience can overturn even the most aggressive authority. The tribunal room froze as Marcus Eland stood beside the long oak table, his jaw still tender but his posture unshaken. A projection screen glowed faintly behind him, casting pale light over the crowded hearing chamber. Every seat in the audience section was filled. Some attendees leaned forward, gripping notepads or holding their breath. Others sat stiffly, their eyes flicking between Marcus and Officer Darren Hale, who sat rigid in a chair across from the panel of 3 senior tribunal officials. "Mr. Eland," one of the panelists said, adjusting his glasses, "you may proceed with your final statement." Marcus took a breath, the pain in his jaw dull but constant, a sharp reminder of what had happened and why he stood there. He reached into a folder, withdrawing a printed sequence of images, screenshots pulled for video evidence recorded by multiple student phones and his own pocket device. His voice, steady and low, carried across the silent room. "This image," he said, pointing to the first slide that displayed on the screen, "shows Officer Hale behind me at timestamp 10 hours, 17 minutes, and 43 seconds, approximately 12 seconds before physical contact. He is visibly agitated. His right hand is curled into a fist." He flipped to the next slide. "Here, timestamp 10 hours, 17 minutes, and 55 seconds. His hand reaches forward. You can clearly see him pushing my left shoulder down." And in the next frame, Marcus paused, clicking again. "This is the moment his palm strikes my jaw." A faint gasp rippled through the audience. Across the room, Hale shifted in his seat, his face pale, lips tight with restrained fury. His attorney leaned toward him, whispering urgently, but Hale brushed him off with a clenched jaw. Marcus continued. "The videos match eyewitness statements. For classmates, one bailiff, and courtroom surveillance confirm Officer Hale escalated without cause. I had not spoken, moved aggressively, or disrespected the space." The lead tribunal official nodded solemnly. "The panel has reviewed this material extensively. Officer Hale, do you have anything to say in your defense?" Hale stood abruptly. "The boy was provoking me," he growled, his voice rising despite his attorney's hand on his sleeve. "He stared at me, deliberately." That smug attitude. He knew he was the judge's son and thought he could do whatever he wanted. A murmur rose from the crowd. One of the tribunal members raised a firm hand. "Mr. Hale, please restrain yourself." But Hale was unraveling. "None of you know what it's like to be disrespected by a kid who thinks he's smarter than you." "Enough," came a voice from the far end of the chamber. Judge Leonard Eland stood from his seat in the observation section. His voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable weight, one honed by decades on the bench. The room quieted instantly. "Officer Hale," Leonard said, his gaze piercing, "you assaulted a minor in a court of law, my son or not. That fact remains unchanged. But let me add what you did not know that day." He stepped forward and handed the panel another document. "This is a prior internal complaint, sealed until now, showing a nearly identical accusation against Officer Hale by a juvenile defendant from 7 months ago. It was dismissed for lack of evidence due to missing security footage. But here," he tapped the envelope, "we have the original complaint and the officer's logged response." The tribunal members skimmed the new document. One of them raised an eyebrow. "This is official?" the panelist asked. Leonard nodded. authenticated by our own internal review board last week. My son's situation prompted them to take a second look. Hale's confidence faltered. He slumped slightly, eyes darting between the judges, his mouth opening to speak, but finding no words. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He simply stood silently, letting the weight of truth do the work. The tribunal chair folded his hands. After careful review of the video evidence, multiple witness statements, and new supporting documentation, this panel finds Officer Darren Hale guilty of misconduct, unlawful use of force, and breach of courtroom protocol. The ruling echoed like a gavel strike. We hereby suspend Officer Hale effective immediately. He will undergo mandatory retraining and is ordered to issue a formal public apology. Further review of his conduct by Internal Affairs is also recommended. Hale remained still, his face locked in a stunned mask. The spectators exhaled at last. Several stood. One young man clapped once before stopping, unsure if it was allowed. Marcus exhaled quietly and turned to Leonard. His father's expression had softened, not with sentimentality, but with pride, sharpened by respect. "You did exactly what you had to," Leonard said in a quiet voice, stepping beside him. "You were calm, measured, and unshakable. That's how justice holds its ground." Marcus nodded. His body still ached, but something deeper had solidified, an understanding that strategy, clarity, and restraint could bend even the most rigid systems. He looked back at the tribunal table, at the silent weight of the final ruling, and realized the moment wasn't just about winning, it was about redefining the lines of power that too many assumed would never move. Courage guided by wisdom transforms the powerless into the decisive force of change. The reforms began the moment the courtroom doors closed behind Officer Darren Hale. No applause, no ceremony, just the quiet shuffle of papers and the firm, deliberate echo of Judge Leonard Eland's footsteps down the corridor. Beside him walked his son, Marcus, his face still bearing faint discoloration from the fractured jaw, but his expression composed, eyes sharp, carrying the weight of a lesson few 16-year-olds ever learned firsthand. Down in the clerk's office, Marcus stood beside his father, drafting the first outline of what would soon become a courthouse-wide reform initiative. The glow of overhead fluorescence buzzed faintly, casting a pale light on the paper as Marcus jotted down his thoughts, clear, practical, strategic. No vengeance, just systems. "We can't let this happen again," Marcus said, his voice still a bit stiff from healing bone. Leonard didn't respond immediately. He watched his son, weighing the gravity of what Marcus was about to do, not just for himself, but for every civilian who might one day sit in that courtroom without knowing how to defend themselves against abuse masked as authority. "I'll initiate the judicial order," Leonard said finally, his voice calm but resolute. "Mandatory protocol training. Civilian engagement. Minors, especially. But the vision? That's yours." The next week, the courthouse's routine was interrupted not by another hearing, but by change. Marcus met with Deputy Chief Rel Lynn in a side conference room. The older man had been skeptical at first, gruff, arms folded, tone tight, but the recordings, the tribunal's ruling, and the public reaction had softened his resistance. "This isn't about punishing officers," Marcus explained, adjusting the collar of his jacket. "It's about protecting the court's integrity, and the people who walk into it trusting they'll be safe." Deputy Rel Lynn looked at him, expression unreadable. Then, slowly he nodded. "What do you need?" "Install low-visibility surveillance in all courtrooms," Marcus replied, his tone calm. "Not for show, for verification. And add quiet room observers during sessions involving juveniles." "Done," Rel Lynn said. "Anything else?" "Yes. Training modules, delivered by professionals, not in-house. Bias de-escalation, body language, juvenile communication. And I want feedback from civilian participants." The deputy gave a short, impressed exhale. "You've done your homework." Marcus didn't smile. "I had to." Meanwhile, Darren Hale had begun making calls. He tried to rally support among old colleagues, tried to suggest the tribunal was overblown, a witch hunt political. But every door he knocked on closed quietly. The evidence was too strong, too public, and worse, too methodically organized. Every angle of the incident had been preserved, backed by multiple witnesses and court-authorized validation. Even his lawyer had stopped returning calls. Marcus didn't follow Hale's attempts at redemption. He didn't need to. The man had chosen his path the moment he raised his hand against a student in a courtroom, and now he had to live with it. But that didn't mean Marcus let his guard down. He tracked the implementation of every reform step with military precision. Each new protocol entered the courthouse system was cross-checked with its outcome. Were officers complying? Were spectators more comfortable? Were recordings secure but reviewable? One morning, Marcus stood in the observation room of Courtroom B, where a new deputy, fresh from training, helped escort a nervous teen and his guardian through metal detection. The deputy didn't touch the teen's shoulder. He knelt instead, meeting the boy's eyes and speaking gently, offering assurance. The boy relaxed, nodded, and followed. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. Relief? Maybe. Not quite victory. He didn't believe in easy wins. But it was something better than silence. Proof that change, when rooted in preparation and clarity, could shift culture without shouting. In the weeks that followed, whispers about Marcus began to shift in tone. Where once he'd been referred to as the judge's kid, now people said his full name. Some called him the strategist. Others just said, that's the kid who changed the court. He didn't want a spotlight. What mattered was that no other teen, no other civilian, would ever have to navigate a courtroom wondering whether the law would protect them or turn against them. And if anyone forgot why it mattered, there were tapes, documentation, policies, and above all, precedent. Late one afternoon, as Marcus packed up files from the evidence review office, a clerk approached, young, maybe early 20s, flustered. Hey, just wanted to say, the clerk began, rubbing the back of his neck. My little brother saw what you did. Watched the hearings. Said he wants to be a court advocate now. Says you made him feel like kids matter. Marcus paused. He didn't know what to say. So he nodded and offered a rare smile. Then it was worth it. As he left the building that day, sunlight pierced the clouds and poured golden over the courthouse steps. His father waited beside the car, arms folded, watching with a faint smile as Marcus approached. Without speaking, Leonard opened the passenger door. Marcus slipped inside, his briefcase resting beside him. Inside it, a blueprint for something greater than any single case. His voice was soft but steady as he looked out the window. Sometimes true influence comes not from authority alone, but from foresight, preparation, and integrity. Marcus Elend stepped up to the polished wooden podium, the room already silent before he even cleared his throat. All eyes in the symposium hall turned toward the 16-year-old, but there was no trace of hesitation in his stance. His left jaw, though fully healed, still remembered the weight of that officer's hand. It gave a quiet ache that helped him focus. The stage lights glinted off the modest microphone as Marcus adjusted it slightly. No notes, no teleprompter, just the quiet conviction of someone who had lived what others were still trying to understand. My name is Marcus Elend, he began, his voice steady and controlled, and I'd like to talk about what happens when silence is mistaken for weakness. A ripple of shifting shoulders moved through the crowd. Seated in the front row, Judge Leonard Elend leaned forward, fingers laced together in quiet attention. Around him sat local law enforcement officials, judges, attorneys, and members of the press, all invited to a special panel on youth engagement and accountability. None of them expected a teenager to command a room like this. But Marcus didn't flinch. He continued, "A year ago, I sat in a courtroom gallery to observe a hearing, just like any student studying law might. I was told to sit quietly. I did. I was told not to interfere. I didn't. Yet somehow, that silence provoked an officer. And within minutes, I had a broken jaw." Gasps whispered like wine through the back of the room. A man near the exit shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Marcus's gaze swept over the audience, not accusing but unwavering. He thought I was just a kid. He thought I didn't know what to do. But what he didn't know is that preparation can be silent. Awareness can be subtle. And restraint is not weakness. A pause. He let the words hang, giving the audience space to reflect. Behind him, A large screen displayed still frames, freeze frames from the courtroom footage. Marcus being shoved, the officer's expression, the deputy's hesitation. Then, the response. Leonard Eland's rise from the bench, the signal to restrain the officer, the recording being handed over to court security. It was more than a presentation. It was a timeline of consequences. A voice from the back called out, "What would you say to officers who claim you were provoking him?" The tone wasn't hostile, but the question hung like a challenge. Marcus didn't hesitate. He stepped slightly away from the podium and faced the direction of the question. I'd ask them to look at the footage, not for drama, but for detail, body language, tone, position. I'd remind them that provocation isn't a matter of feeling disrespected. It's about facts. And I'd ask them, what is more dangerous, a teenager sitting still or a grown man who sees stillness as a threat? The room fell even quieter. Leonard, still seated, closed his eyes for a brief moment. He'd been through hearings where lawyers twice his son's age lost control of their arguments. But Marcus was surgical. No flirtage, no outburst, just clean, ethical precision. As the presentation continued, Marcus outlined new proposals, mandatory engagement training for officers assigned to youth-heavy courtrooms, clear guidelines for when physical intervention is appropriate and when it's not, a real-time reporting app that allows civilian observers to submit non-intrusive alerts to a neutral courtroom monitor. Slides transitioned behind him, showing mock-ups of the interface, data from pilot programs, and endorsement from junior clerks who had beta-tested the system. But perhaps the most gripping moment came when Marcus paused midway and, instead of continuing, pulled a small object from his coat pocket. It was the very same audio recorder he had used that day. The room leaned in. He played 5 seconds of the recording. Hale's voice snarling something inaudible, the sound of Marcus's notebook hitting the floor, followed by the unmistakable scuffle. He stopped the audio abruptly. That's all I needed. Not 10 minutes of chaos. Not a crowd yelling. Just 5 seconds of evidence. That 5 seconds changed the way this entire courthouse operates. Applause tried to rise, but Marcus held up a hand. This isn't about praise. It's about prevention. I don't want to be remembered for surviving something. I want to be remembered for stopping it from happening again. The applause this time was louder, but respectful. No cheating. Just the sound of adult professionals realizing they had been outmaneuvered, not in aggression, but in grace. As he stepped back from the podium, Leonard rose from his seat and met his son halfway. The judge didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His hand on Marcus's shoulder said enough. Reporters scribbled furiously. One man whispered to another, "He's only 16?" Marcus overheard it, but he didn't react. He simply took a quiet breath, eyes scanning the exit signs, the armed security at the back, the way officers stood straighter now than they had when he first entered the room. As the room began to buzz with questions and interviews, Marcus walked offstage with his father at his side. And as they passed the final row of spectators, an older court marshal murmured under his breath, "That boy just changed this city." Neither of them turned. The smallest voice, when guided by clarity and principle, can echo louder than the strongest shout. The moment Marcus stepped back into the Marbleton County Courthouse, everything had changed, but no one dared say it aloud. The same courthouse bench where his jaw was broken now gleamed under improved lighting and a new overhead camera, its silent red blink a reminder that no moment here would go unrecorded again. The air, once heavy with tension and distrust, now hummed with cautious awareness. A year had passed, but the echoes of that day still lingered like a warning in the walls. The reforms hadn't come easily. They had been resisted at first, quietly, bureaucratically, through paperwork delays and procedural debates, but they came. Marcus had made sure of it. That morning, as he stood in courtroom B alongside his father, Judge Leonard Eland, Marcus didn't look like the wounded teen from a year ago. Dressed in a charcoal vest over a crisp white shirt, he held a small folder under one arm, notes for a youth legal workshop that would take place in the afternoon. His composure hadn't dulled. If anything, it had sharpened. Every footstep he took echoed with purpose. Leonard stood near the bench, reviewing an early draft of the new Observer program Marcus had helped design. "You think they'll listen?" Marcus asked, voice steady but quiet. Leonard looked up, his eyes calm beneath silver brows. "They already are. They just don't know it yet." A group of young boys entered the courtroom, escorted by a junior bailiff. They were part of the courthouse's newly formed Youth Observer Initiative, invited to witness real cases and learn the intricacies of justice. A year ago, this would have been unthinkable. Now it was protocol. As the session began, Marcus sat in the far-right gallery, where he'd once clutched his notebook and tried to remain invisible. Today, he was visible, and intentionally so. Deputies glanced his way, not with suspicion, but with quiet acknowledgement. They had been retrained under Judge Elan's directive. Their conduct, posture, and tone now followed stricter guidelines, thanks to the written policies Marcus had helped craft with the court's ethics board. Still, not all ghosts stay buried. "Hey, Marcus," came a voice during the session break. It was Officer Brent Caro, one of the few deputies who had quietly opposed Hale's behavior the day of the incident. He approached slowly, his tone respectful. "Yes, Officer Caro," Marcus responded, standing. Caro scratched his chin. "Just wanted to say, some of us were wrong to keep quiet. It shouldn't have taken that long for someone to step in." Marcus offered a tight smile. Acknowledging it now still helps. It always helps. The moment passed like a gust, but its weight lingered. Outside the courtroom, Marcus and Leonard walked the marble corridor where a new digital exhibit had been installed. It wasn't flashy, just a simple panel detailing the reforms of the past year. Enhanced transparency measures, mandatory civilian rights training for all court officers, and the establishment of a Youth Engagement and Oversight Council. At the bottom was a quote, Marcus's own, from his post-tribunal interview. "Preparation and patience can overturn even the most aggressive authority." They paused before the plaque. "You're on the wall now," Leonard said, nodding toward it. "I'd rather be in the room where rules are written," Marcus replied. "You are, and you're writing them," Leonard said quietly. They both knew the fight wasn't over. Reforms could erode. Policies could be forgotten. But symbols endured, and more importantly, systems could evolve if tended with consistency and courage. Later that afternoon, Marcus stood in the courthouse library-turned-lecture hall, addressing a small group of teen observers, their eyes wide with a mix of admiration and disbelief. They had heard the story, most of them had seen the footage, but it wasn't the punch or the court ruling they wanted to understand. It was how someone their age had stayed calm, calculated, and strategic under direct threat. "You don't need a badge or a gavel to protect truth," Marcus told them. "You just need clarity and a plan." One of the boys raised his hand. "Were you scared when it happened?" "Yes," Marcus replied without hesitation. "But fear doesn't mean you're powerless. It just means you have to prepare faster." In the back of the room, Leonard observed silently. Not as a judge, not as a father, but as a witness to something larger. His son had turned a moment of brutality into a system of accountability. What began as a personal trial had become public reform. Outside the building, the wind shifted, rattling the flags along the courthouse's west wall. A few officers on break glanced at Marcus through the glass as he stepped out with Leonard. They didn't look away. The boy they once underestimated was now woven into the very institution they served. As they reached the steps, Marcus paused. "Do you think Hale ever understood what really happened that day?" Leonard folded his arms. He thought he was asserting power, but what he triggered was transformation. Marcus looked out at the parking lot where Hale had once stormed away in handcuffs. A subtle nod passed between father and son, not of celebration, but of acknowledgement. There were still flaws in the system, still risks, still dangers. But now there was also a blueprint, and a voice strong enough to be heard. As they descended the courthouse steps, Leonard rested a hand on Marcus's shoulder. A well-planned response can turn the most dangerous situation into a teaching moment for generations. The legacy of courage is measured not by battles fought, but by the systems it strengthens for those who follow. The cop froze as the gavel came down, the courtroom hushed, and the teen's father ruled decisively against him. If you believe real authority protects the innocent and strikes without warning, subscribe now, because justice always lands first. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It highlights abuse of authority, prejudice, and the moment accountability confronts wrongdoing. Its purpose is to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and encourage conversations about equality, justice, and respecting every individual in positions of authority.